My name is Linda Harper. My daughter married a poor, abusive man and dreamed he would become rich. Later, she resented me for not stopping her. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story, because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. From the moment Emily announced she was engaged, I felt a storm brewing inside me. She was my only child, the light of my life, and I had raised her with hopes that she'd find happiness and security. When she told me about Jake, a man from a modest background barely scraping by, a quiet alarm rang deep in my chest. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who stifled her daughter's dreams, but there was a cold knot of fear I couldn't ignore. Jake was polite and seemed kind enough in those early meetings, but there was something hidden behind his eyes, a simmering anger that didn't sit right with me. I tried to push the feeling aside, reminding myself that love is blind and that Emily was determined. She told me, "Mom, don't be jealous. You just don't understand. He's going to make something of himself, I can feel it." Her confidence was like a shield, and I was hesitant to pierce it. I told her gently, "Emily, I just want you to be safe and happy. Sometimes people show us who they are in small ways before we see the big picture." She smiled, but there was a hint of frustration in her eyes. "I appreciate your concern, Mom, but I have to make my own choices. Please trust me." I wanted to believe in her faith, but the unease lingered. The first months after their wedding were filled with hopeful smiles and quiet dreams. Emily's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen for years. She talked about their plans, starting a business, moving to a better neighborhood, building a future. But beneath those hopeful words, something dark was growing. It started with missed calls and unanswered texts. She made excuses, saying she was busy or tired. I brushed it off, thinking maybe newlywed life was overwhelming. But then came the bruises, faint at first, quickly becoming harder to hide. She wore long sleeves even in the heat of summer. When I asked, she said she tripped or bumped into something. My heart ached, but she asked me to keep it between us. One night, I found her curled up in the kitchen, silently crying. The weight of her secret was crushing her. She told me about the yelling, the harsh words, the night spent trembling alone. She was afraid, but she didn't want to admit it to anyone, least of all to Jake. "I love him, Mom," she whispered through tears. "I want to believe he can change." But I saw through the veil of hope. I saw the fear and the silent suffering that she tried to hide from the world. Her husband's temper grew worse. Emily stopped answering my calls. She pushed me away, telling me I didn't understand her struggles, that I was judging her choices. The distance between us grew, and with every cold word my heart broke a little more. I questioned myself endlessly. Had I failed her? Could I have done something differently to protect her? But I also knew this was her life, her fight, and all I could do was wait for the moment she was ready. That moment came one winter evening. She showed up at my door, bruised and trembling, a small bag in her hand. She was determined to leave, to break free from the nightmare she'd been living. But by the next morning, she was back with Jake, saying she had made a mistake. Mom love means standing by each other through everything, she told me, her voice fragile but resolute. Her words shattered me. I wanted to scream, to tell her that love shouldn't hurt this way. But I understood love can be a cage, beautiful and deadly all at once. Then the resentment began. She blamed me for everything, for doubting her, for ruining her marriage with my interference. I was the villain in her story, the obstacle to her happiness. Each accusation was like a knife, but I held my tongue. One night, after a violent outburst from Jake, I couldn't stay silent any longer. I confronted him, risking everything to protect my daughter. The family was divided. His relatives turned against me, painting me as the troublemaker trying to break them apart. But in the shadows, I found unexpected allies, friends, counselors, and strangers who believed in justice. We gathered evidence, found legal support, and helped Emily find her voice. When she finally admitted the truth, the pain she'd hidden for so long relief washed over us both. Slowly, she began rebuilding her life, leaning on me as her anchor. Yet even as she healed, a new wound appeared. She resented me for the hardship and losses we had faced. She accused me of being the cause of her downfall. It was hard to hear, but I accepted her anger as part of her journey. In the end, I learned that some battles aren't about winning. They're about standing strong no matter what for those you love. If you've ever felt powerless watching someone you love suffer, or if you've stood silent while the world turned its back, share your story below. And don't forget to subscribe to Grace's Truth for more stories of courage, betrayal, and ultimate redemption. The beginning of trouble didn't hit like a sudden storm. It was more like a slow, relentless drip, a quiet unraveling that crept into every corner of Emily's life until the cracks became impossible to hide. In those first months after the wedding, I wanted so badly to believe in Jake's promises and my daughter's faith in him. I told myself that love would soften the rough edges, that their dreams of a better future would shield her from pain. But reality proved far crueler. It started with small changes. Emily's once warm and open demeanor grew reserved and distant. When I called, her answers became clipped, almost rehearsed, like she was hiding something she didn't want me to know. She canceled visits without explanation, and sometimes when I showed up unexpectedly, I found the apartment locked or her not answering the door. Those moments crushed me, but I tried not to let my worries show. Then came the bruises. At first, they were faint, easy to dismiss as accidents: a bump on the arm, a scrape on the thigh. But the way Emily carefully pulled down her sleeves in the summer heat, the way she avoided long hugs, told me otherwise. One afternoon, I saw a dark mark blossom across her cheek. She quickly turned away, avoiding my gaze, her lips pressed into a tight line. "Mom, I'm fine," she said, but the tremble in her voice betrayed her. I wanted to scream at Jake to make him stop, but Emily begged me to keep quiet. She was terrified of what would happen if the truth came out. She said she loved him and believed he could change, that she had to hold on for their future. I didn't know how to argue with hope so desperate it blinded her to pain. Jake's temper was like a volcano, unpredictable and destructive. Sometimes it was a quiet storm, a cold silence filled with sharp accusing glances and a bitter mood. Other times it erupted into furious yelling and slamming doors that left Emily shaking in fear. I saw the weight she carried, a burden she refused to share fully with anyone. I tried to reach out. I called. I sent messages. I went to their home, but each time I was met with resistance. Emily told me, "You don't understand, Mom. You never did." Her words stung like betrayal, but I knew they came from a place of confusion and fear. She was caught between loyalty to the man she married and the safety she craved. One day, after weeks of unanswered calls, I showed up unannounced. The door was unlocked, and I could hear raised voices inside. Jake's anger filled the small apartment like a suffocating fog. Emily's voice was soft, trembling with a mixture of fear and pleading. I wanted to burst in to save her from the nightmare, but she looked at me with desperate eyes and shook her head. She wasn't ready, not yet. That night, I sat outside in the cold, the weight of helplessness pressing down on me. How do you protect someone who doesn't want to be saved? The silence between us grew thicker. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and plans, became guarded and strained. Emily started to pull away, shutting me out piece by piece. I watched helplessly as the bright spark in her dimmed. Then came the moment that shattered my heart, the first time she disappeared for days without a word. I called every friend, every place she might have gone. The hours stretched into days, and every tick of the clock screamed in my ears. When she finally came back, her eyes were vacant, her soul battered. She told me she had gone to try and fix things on her own, to hold on to the life she thought she wanted. But I saw the truth behind her forced smile, a woman broken by love turned cruel. I knew then that this was no ordinary struggle. Emily was trapped in a prison of fear and hope, caught in the grip of a man who promised her the world, but delivered pain instead. My nights became filled with worry and guilt. Had I failed her? Could I have stopped this if I had been stronger, louder, more insistent? But she was my daughter, not a child anymore, and all I could do was wait, pray, and be ready when she was ready. She started blaming me. "You don't trust me," she said. "You never believed in us." Her words cut deeper than any wound Jake had ever inflicted. I was no longer the mother she turned to for comfort. I was the enemy standing in the way of her dreams. Yet I held on to the hope that one day she would see the truth and let me in again. The house where Emily and Jake lived became a place I feared more than any haunted nightmare. I worried that each visit might be the last time I saw my daughter whole. I learned to read the signs, the sudden silences, the forced smiles, the hurried goodbyes. Emily was a ghost in her own life, fading away under the weight of broken promises. I made friends with counselors and support workers, gathering knowledge and resources to be ready when the time came. I quietly reached out to others who had walked this path, learning the language of survival and escape. It was a lonely road filled with moments of despair and glimmers of hope. I watched my daughter fight battles I could only imagine, all while carrying a facade of strength to the world. One afternoon, after months of silence, Emily called. Her voice was weak, but there was a flicker of something new: determination. "Mom," she whispered, "I think I need help." That call was the first step toward the long journey of healing and courage, and I was ready to walk it with her, no matter how hard, no matter the cost. The cracks in Emily's marriage started small, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but to me, they were glaring warnings flashing like red lights on a dashboard. It wasn't just the bruises she tried to hide beneath long sleeves, or the sudden silences that fell over her like a thick fog. It was the change in her spirit, the slow erosion of the vibrant woman I had raised into someone I barely recognized. Jake's temper wasn't just a fleeting mood, it was a violent undercurrent running through every moment of their lives. At first, I thought it was just stress, a man struggling to make good on his promises. But I was wrong. The anger was deeper, darker, and more dangerous than I ever imagined. I remember the first time I heard him yell at Emily through the thin walls of their apartment. I had stopped by, unexpectedly hoping for a visit, maybe even a chance to catch a smile or a hug. Instead, I was met with a storm. His voice was loud, sharp, slicing through the air with cruelty that made my skin crawl. Emily's soft, trembling voice tried to calm him, but the fear in her tone was unmistakable. I wanted to burst through the door to pull her out of that hell, but she looked at me with eyes that begged silence. She wasn't ready. She wasn't safe yet. That night, I sat in my car outside their building, the cold biting at my skin as tears slipped down my face. How could the woman I loved so fiercely be trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape? And how was I supposed to save her when she pushed me away? Our conversations became scarce, guarded, and filled with resentment. Emily would pick fights over the smallest things: my advice, my concern, even my presence. "You don't understand," she would say, voice sharp as glass. "You never have." I understood more than she knew, but I kept that knowledge locked inside. I was a mother after all, and sometimes love meant waiting in the shadows until your child was ready to see the light. The bruises worsened. One afternoon, I saw a dark purple mark blooming across her collarbone. She tried to cover it with her hair, but I caught it. "Emily, please," I whispered, "tell me what's happening." She shook her head, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm fine, Mom. I can handle it." But she wasn't fine. No daughter should live in fear of the man she vowed to love. No mother should watch helplessly as her child's spirit withers under the weight of violence and lies. Jake's controlling nature extended beyond anger. He isolated her from friends and family, made her doubt her own worth, and chipped away at her confidence until all that was left was a frightened woman clinging to fading hope. I could see it in the way Emily flinched at sudden movements, in the way she jumped at the sound of a slammed door. I tried to be there for her, but each attempt to help was met with suspicion or anger. "You're trying to control me," she accused. "You don't trust me." Her words broke me, but I knew her fear made her lash out. She was torn between the man who hurt her and the mother who loved her unconditionally. One day, Emily disappeared. No calls, no messages, just silence. The hours dragged into days. I called every friend, every place she might have gone. I sat by the phone praying for a sign, a voice, anything. When she finally returned, she was hollowed out, as if the light inside her had been snuffed out. She told me she'd gone to try and fix things, to hold on to the dream she once believed in. But I saw the truth beneath the surface: fear, exhaustion, and defeat. And then came the blaming. "You never should have doubted me," she said bitterly. "You ruined everything." Her words stabbed me deeper than any blow Jake ever dealt. I was supposed to protect her, to be her refuge. Instead, I was the one she saw as the enemy. But I never stopped loving her. I never stopped fighting for her. I learned to listen for the signs, the silence, the forced smiles, the hurried goodbyes. I became a quiet warrior, seeking help from counselors, support groups, anyone who could offer a way out. And through it all, I held on to the hope that one day Emily would find the strength to break free. That hope was fragile, but it was all I had. The weight of guilt pressed down on me like a stone, heavy and unyielding. Every day, I replayed the moments leading up to Emily's wedding in my mind, searching for the second when I could have stopped her, when I should have spoken louder, warned more fiercely, or simply done something different. But I never did. I let her go, believing in her judgment, hoping love would protect her where I could not. That guilt became a silent companion, whispering harsh accusations in the dark. "You failed her," it said. "You let this happen." Some nights it kept me awake until dawn, the ache in my chest, a relentless reminder of my helplessness. But even in my guilt, I tried to be her anchor, steady and unwavering. I showed up when she called, held her hand when she cried, and listened to the fragments of pain she dared to share. I became the quiet witness to her suffering, careful not to push, to respect the fragile thread she clung to. She never wanted to admit she was trapped. The words abuse or violence never passed her lips openly. She was afraid of what would come if she spoke the truth, afraid of breaking the illusion she had built for herself, afraid of judgment, afraid of losing what little control she had. There were times when she seemed almost hopeful, whispering dreams of change and promises Jake made when the anger faded. I wanted to believe those moments too, but the bruises told a different story. One evening, after a long day of work, I found Emily sitting on the edge of her bed, tears streaming down her face. She was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a room with a heaviness you can't ignore. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I sat beside her, wrapping my arms around her trembling frame. "You don't have to do it alone," I told her. "I'm here. We'll find a way out together." Her tears soaked into my shirt as she clung to me, a fragile, broken child beneath the strong woman she tried so hard to be. But the path to healing was anything but simple. Jake's hold on her tightened with every step we tried to take. He manipulated her, isolated her, and filled her mind with doubt about my intentions. "She's trying to ruin us," he told her, twisting truth into poison. His family echoed his accusations, turning their backs on me and painting me as the meddling mother-in-law who couldn't accept their son's marriage. I was cast as the villain in a story where I was only trying to save my daughter. Those attacks stung, but they never broke me. I found allies in unexpected places, friends who listened without judgment, professionals who offered guidance, and even strangers who shared their own stories of survival and courage. Together, we built a network of support strong enough to hold Emily when she was ready to fall. One day, she confided in me the darkest secret she'd kept hidden the night Jake crossed a line that changed everything. I was so scared, she said, voice trembling. I didn't know what to do. Her confession shook me to my core, but it also ignited a fire within me. I vowed then that no matter the cost, I would protect her from the man who threatened her happiness and safety. We began to gather evidence, quietly documenting the abuse and seeking legal advice. It was a delicate dance. One wrong move could shatter everything. Emily struggled with the shame and fear that came with exposing the truth. She worried about losing Jake, about the social stigma, about starting over in a world that already seemed so cruel. But step by step, she found her voice. Our relationship, once strained by fear and resentment, began to heal in the small moments. A shared cup of tea, a late-night conversation, a gentle reminder that she was not alone. There were setbacks, moments when the past clawed back with fury and doubt. But each time we stood firm, strengthened by the bond that only a mother and daughter share. I saw Emily's resilience grow, the spark of the woman I once knew flickering back to life. And yet, even as we fought together, the hardest battle was yet to come, the fight for her freedom, not just from Jake, but from the shadows of blame and resentment that lingered between us. Because sometimes the ones we love most can turn against us in the darkest hours, blinded by pain and fear. But I was ready to stand by her side through every storm. The night Emily first tried to escape will haunt me forever. It wasn't a sudden decision, it was the breaking point after months of unbearable silence, bruises, and broken promises. I still remember the way she showed up at my door carrying nothing but a small bag, her eyes hollow but fierce with desperation. She didn't say much at first, just stood there trembling as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her frail shoulders. When I pulled her inside and wrapped my arms around her, she finally broke the floodgates opening with sobs that tore through the quiet of the night. "I can't do this anymore, Mom," she whispered between tears. "I'm scared. I'm so scared." It was the moment I had been waiting for and dreading all at once. I wanted to hold her forever, to protect her from everything and everyone. But as the night stretched on, I realized that healing wouldn't be instant. It wouldn't come without pain, and it certainly wouldn't be without sacrifice. Emily's husband Jake was waiting on the other side of that door, a man desperate to keep his hold on her, on their life, no matter the cost. When she told him she was leaving, his face twisted into something I barely recognized: rage mixed with desperation and a terrifying sense of ownership. "He's dangerous," Emily warned me the next day. "More than you think." She was right. The days that followed were some of the darkest I've ever lived through. Jake's threats became more direct, his anger more volatile. Emily was terrified, but she stayed strong for the sake of our family, convinced that if she just held on, things might change. But change didn't come. Instead, the resentment between us grew like a wildfire. Emily blamed me for encouraging her to leave, for ruining the life she had tried to build with Jake. The love she once had for me was buried beneath layers of anger and fear. "You don't understand," she snapped one day, her voice sharp and cold. "You've never been in my shoes." Those words cut deeper than any blow Jake had ever landed. I knew she was hurting more than she could say, but her pain was now a wall between us. I was the mother she needed, but also the one she pushed away the most. Jake's family didn't help matters. They rallied around him, painting me as the meddling outsider who wanted to break their son's marriage. They spread rumors, whispered accusations, and turned everyone against me. For a time, I was alone, but I refused to back down. I sought help from counselors, legal advisors, and support groups. I learned how to document abuse, how to build a case that would protect Emily without putting her in more danger. Each meeting, each phone call was a step closer to freedom. Emily was cautious, fearful of what the future might hold. She worried about social stigma, the judgment of friends and family, the uncertainty of starting over with nothing. But I reminded her she wasn't alone. Together we built a safety net, a plan for escape, and a promise to reclaim her life. There were setbacks moments when fear made her retreat, when the past seemed too heavy to leave behind. But with every fall, she got back up stronger and more determined. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult meeting with a lawyer, Emily broke down. She confessed the guilt she carried, the shame of leaving behind the man she once loved, the fear of judgment, and the haunting question of what her future would look like. "I feel like I'm losing everything," she said softly. "But maybe I'm finally finding myself." Her words were a balm to my soul. In those moments, I saw the woman Emily was becoming, the woman she was always meant to be before the darkness took hold. But the road ahead was still long, and the battles were far from over. Jake's threats didn't stop. He sent messages, showed up unexpectedly, and tried to intimidate us both. His family's opposition grew louder, their whispers more poisonous. Yet in the face of it all, I stood firm. For Emily, for her future, for the chance at a life free from fear. Our fight was more than just legal, it was emotional, psychological, and deeply personal. And through it all, our bond, though tested and strained, grew stronger. I knew the road to healing would be slow. I knew there would be moments when Emily would lash out, when resentment would flare, when the past would haunt her dreams. But I promised to walk beside her through every dark night and every bright morning, because a mother's love is fierce and relentless. And sometimes that's the only thing that can save a broken soul. The resentment Emily carried toward me was like a wound that refused to heal, raw, pulsing, and unforgiving. Despite everything she had been through, the violence, the fear, the suffocating grip of Jake's control, she somehow blamed me. Not just for my involvement in her life, but for the very miseries that followed when she tried to escape. It was a cruel twist of fate, and though my heart broke under the weight of her words, I understood why. When you're drowning in pain, the ones trying to save you sometimes feel like the ones pulling you under. "You don't get to decide what's best for me," Emily snapped during one of our most heated arguments, her voice trembling between fury and exhaustion. "You think you're protecting me, but all you've done is ruin everything. If you hadn't pushed me to leave, none of this would have happened." Her words sliced through me, sharper than any physical wound. Yet I said nothing, holding back my pain. I knew this was part of her healing, the need to place blame, to try and make sense of the chaos. It was easier to fight me than to confront the reality of Jake's cruelty, the shattered dreams, and the lost years. In those moments, I realized how much fear and hurt could twist a person's love into something unrecognizable. Emily wasn't angry at me. She was angry at the situation, at the betrayal of her own hopes and trust. The ghost of Jake still haunted her life. Though he was no longer in her home, his presence lingered like a storm cloud, dark and threatening. Threatening phone calls shadowed encounters, and the cold war of his family's disapproval surrounded us. They painted me as the interloper, the selfish mother-in-law who tore their family apart. Friends we once shared turned cold, whispers spreading like poison through our circles. Yet through it all, I refused to falter. I became her unwavering pillar, the steady hand reaching out in the darkest hours. I knew the journey to freedom was rarely straightforward. It was jagged, messy, and full of setbacks, and I was prepared to stay the course for as long as it took. Some days, Emily was barely holding on, the weight of trauma threatening to crush her entirely. I watched her struggle against the shadows, flashbacks that robbed her sleep, anxiety that twisted her stomach, moments of despair that drained her voice. But amidst the darkness, the ember of the woman I knew flickered, faint but stubborn. In those fragile moments, I found solace in the unexpected kindness of others, counselors who listened without judgment, friends who offered sanctuary, strangers who reached out with stories of survival and hope. We formed a circle of strength around Emily, a network that helped her rediscover the power within herself. One afternoon, as the golden light of dusk filtered through the curtains, Emily looked at me with eyes heavy yet searching. "I don't know if I can forgive you for everything," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper, "but I know I need you." That confession shattered the barriers we'd built. It was the first fragile thread knitting our hearts back together. Together, we began peeling back the layers of pain, the fears she had buried, the guilt I carried, and the anger that simmered beneath it all. It was raw and painful, filled with tears and sharp words, but each conversation brought us closer to understanding. Emily's path to healing was slow and uneven. Trust once shattered is never easily rebuilt. She wrestled with self-doubt, with memories that clawed at her sanity, and with the heavy burden of shame. I watched her retreat into herself at times, yet every day she fought to reclaim pieces of the life stolen from her. Our battles were not confined to the emotional realm. The practical realities of escaping an abusive marriage were relentless court hearings, protection orders, social services, custody battles. The legal system, while a lifeline, was also a battlefield, draining and intimidating. Jake's threats lingered like a shadow over every step we took. His messages were filled with venom, his appearances unannounced and menacing. His family's refusal to let go was a constant reminder that the fight was far from over. Yet each small victory chipped away at his hold on Emily. I learned patience the hard way, how to hold space for her anger, her fear, her moments of despair. I learned that sometimes love is quiet endurance, showing up even when you're tired, even when hope seems fragile. One evening, as we sat together in the soft glow of the living room lamp, Emily took my hand and said, "Thank you for never giving up on me." In that moment, all the years of pain, distance, and bitterness melted away. What remained was a bond forged in the crucible of suffering, stronger than either of us had imagined. I realized that sometimes the hardest battles are not the ones fought in courts or with fists, but the ones waged in the heart. And through every dark night, every tear, every broken promise, a mother's love endures. It is relentless, it is fierce, and it is unbreakable. The night everything changed, the night I finally reached my breaking point, still plays in my mind like a film I can't stop watching. It was a moment that forced me to shed every ounce of fear, hesitation, and doubt, and step into a role I never thought I'd have to play: a protector ready to confront a dangerous man for the sake of my daughter's life. Jake's temper had always been volatile, but that night it boiled over into something violent, something unforgivable. Emily called me in tears, her voice barely audible, the panic raw in every breath. I could hear the shouting in the background, the harsh words, the slamming doors, and then a sickening silence that made my blood run cold. I drove through the night, heart pounding with dread and anger. When I arrived, the door was ajar, and inside was chaos. Furniture overturned, shards of broken glass glittering on the floor like cold stars. Emily stood in the middle of the wreckage, trembling, but defiant, bruises marking her skin like cruel trophies. Jake was nowhere to be seen. In that moment, I knew I had to be strong, not just for Emily, but for myself. I took her hand, held her close, and promised her that this nightmare would end. The days that followed were a whirlwind of police reports, medical exams, and legal consultations. Emily was terrified of the repercussions of Jake's wrath, of public shame, of the uncertain road ahead. But I was there every step of the way, a shield and a guide through the labyrinth of pain. Her husband's family was furious. They accused me of ruining their son, of fabricating stories to break the marriage. Their words were weapons, their disdain cutting deep. But I didn't care. My only focus was Emily's safety and healing. We found unexpected allies, counselors who believed her, advocates who fought for her rights, and friends who stood by her without judgment. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Emily's resentment toward me softened, replaced by a tentative gratitude. She saw, perhaps for the first time, that I was not her enemy, but her fiercest ally. One afternoon, as we sat in the sunlit kitchen, she reached out and took my hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she said, her voice fragile but sincere. That moment was a balm to my soul, a reminder that love, even when battered and bruised, could still heal. But the battle was far from over. Legal proceedings dragged on, each hearing a test of Emily's courage and resilience. Jake's threats continued in the shadows, veiled warnings, subtle intimidation, attempts to undermine her strength. There were moments when Emily faltered, when the weight of fear threatened to crush her. I held her whispered words of encouragement and reminded her of her worth. Together, we navigated the emotional roller coaster, victories and setbacks, hope and despair. Each step forward was hard-won, each tear shed a testament to her bravery. I watched her reclaim her life piece by piece, the laughter returning to her eyes, the strength growing in her voice, the light slowly rekindling in her spirit. And though scars remained both seen and unseen, Emily was no longer a prisoner. She was a survivor. Our relationship, once strained and broken, began to mend in the quiet moments, the shared meals, the late-night talks, the simple presence of knowing we were not alone. I realized that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with fists, but with love and unwavering determination. That night, when I stepped between my daughter and her abuser, I found a strength I never knew I had, a fierce protective fire, fueled by the boundless love of a mother willing to face any darkness for her child. And in that fire, we found our salvation. The storm that followed my confrontation with Jake wasn't just external. It tore through the fragile fabric of our family, dividing us in ways I hadn't imagined possible. When I stood up to protect Emily that night, I thought it would mark the beginning of her freedom, the turning point from fear to hope. Instead, it ignited a war, and the battle lines were drawn not only between us and Jake, but also within the very people we once trusted. His family, once cordial, now turned hostile. They painted me as a meddling mother-in-law, a villain intent on destroying their son's marriage. They whispered behind closed doors, spreading rumors that questioned Emily's character, my motives, and even my sanity. It was a calculated campaign to isolate us, to break the bond between mother and daughter. I remember the first time his sister confronted me at a family gathering. Her eyes were cold, her voice sharp. "You don't understand what you're doing," she warned. "You're tearing this family apart." I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm protecting my daughter," I said simply, "and nothing will change that." But words weren't enough to stop the assault. Social invitations stopped coming. Mutual friends chose sides, and the silence from the people we once called family was deafening. I watched as Emily's world shrank, her support system unraveling before my eyes. It was heartbreaking, a cruel reminder that sometimes the ones who should stand by you are the first to turn away. In those dark days, we found strength in the unexpected. Support groups became a lifeline, places where Emily could speak freely without fear of judgment. Counselors helped us navigate the tangled emotions of betrayal, grief, and anger. And strangers connected only by shared pain became fierce allies. Together, we began to rebuild what was lost. Emily's journey toward healing was neither straight nor easy. Trust had been shattered not only by Jake, but by the people who abandoned her. She wrestled with feelings of shame and guilt, haunted by the idea that she was alone, that she had failed somehow. I reminded her every day that she was not to blame, that her worth was not defined by others' cruelty. Slowly, the light returned to her eyes. Small victories like a genuine smile, a night's restful sleep, a conversation without tears became milestones in our healing journey. But healing is not a destination. It's a process. There were moments when Emily retreated into herself, shadows swallowing her courage. Nightmares woke her, screaming anxiety pinned her in place, and memories clawed at her sanity. I learned to be patient, to listen without judgment, to hold space for her pain. The legal battles were grueling. Every court date, every meeting with lawyers was a reminder of the fight ahead. We prepared meticulously, gathering evidence, documenting abuse, and building a case that could protect Emily once and for all. Jake's threats continued, subtle at first, then more brazen. Messages filled with venom appearances that rattled our nerves, attempts to intimidate and silence us. But Emily grew stronger with each challenge. Her resilience became a beacon lighting the way through the darkest nights. One afternoon, as we sat together in the quiet of the living room, she looked at me with a resolve I hadn't seen in months. "We're going to get through this," she said firmly. I nodded, pride swelling in my chest. Our relationship, once fractured by fear and resentment, began to mend. We found comfort in shared moments, a warm meal, a heartfelt conversation, the simple act of being together. It was a reminder that love, no matter how battered, can heal. But even as we moved forward, scars remained. Not just on Emily's body, but in her heart and mind. Trust was slow to rebuild, and the road to self-forgiveness was steep. I knew the battle was far from over, because sometimes the hardest fight is within. And through it all, I vowed to stand by her, steadfast, patient, and fiercely loving. Because a mother's love is a force that no darkness can extinguish. The tide began to turn when we found unexpected allies, people whose belief in justice and compassion breathed new life into our fight. It wasn't a sudden breakthrough, but a subtle shift, almost imperceptible at first, like the faint whisper of a breeze before a storm. I almost missed it myself, caught up in the relentless weight of fear and uncertainty. But once the momentum started, it carried us forward like a powerful wave that neither of us could resist. I remember the exact day I met Sarah, the counselor, who would become our beacon in the darkness. She specialized in working with survivors of domestic abuse. But what struck me immediately wasn't just her qualifications, it was her calm presence. The kind of calm that doesn't demand attention, but invites it. When she first spoke with Emily, there was a softness in her voice that reached through the chaos in Emily's mind and gently touched the fragile places inside her. For the first time, I saw Emily relax, her shoulders drop, and her breath even out. It was as if Sarah's mere presence gave her permission to breathe again. But Sarah did more than just listen to the words Emily said. She listened to the silences between them. She heard the hesitation, the pain carefully masked, the unspoken fears that lurked beneath every sentence. With Sarah's patient guidance, Emily began to reclaim her voice, slowly but surely, telling her story on her own terms. No longer was it a forced confession or a desperate plea for help. It became her truth, spoken with courage, and finally, without shame. That was the turning point. Sarah helped us connect with a local support group, a circle of women bound together not by coincidence, but by shared experience and fierce determination. They were warriors who had each walked through their own hells and survived, who had turned their wounds into strength. For Emily, this circle became a lifeline, a reminder that she was not alone. Listening to their stories, stories echoing hers in heartache and triumph, she found a new sense of belonging. They didn't expect her to be perfect, only to be herself, to survive and endure. Strength they showed her wasn't about never falling. It was about rising again and again, no matter how many times you were knocked down. As Emily opened up more, she shared the fears and doubts she had carried in silence. She spoke of the nightmares where Jake's threats still chased her, the crushing loneliness that came with rebuilding a life shattered by betrayal, the moments when she felt herself slipping back into the darkness she had fought so hard to escape. And through all of it, I stood by her, steady, patient, ready to catch her whenever she stumbled. I was no longer just her mother. I had become her anchor. The legal battle, however, was a mountain we had to climb every single day. We found an attorney who understood the complexities of abuse cases, someone whose compassion was as fierce as her professionalism. She became our guide through a maze that seemed designed to exhaust and dishearten survivors: restraining orders, custody disputes, endless paperwork, and courtroom hearings where Emily had to face Jake again, publicly confronting the man who had stolen so much from her. Every hearing was a trial of courage, each one stripping away a little more of the fear that had gripped her for so long. Meanwhile, Jake's family refused to back down. Their campaign of defamation was relentless. They whispered lies to friends, spread rumors to neighbors, tried to isolate Emily further in an effort to break her spirit. But no matter how loudly they shouted their falsehoods, the truth had started to shine through the cracks. Witnesses came forward, people who had seen Jake's true nature, who stood by Emily's side. Evidence was collected and presented, weaving a story that made it impossible to deny what had happened. Slowly, that web of deceit began to unravel. One particularly harrowing day, Emily received a threatening message. I still remember the look of terror that flashed across her face, the way her hands trembled as she showed me the words. Fear wrapped itself around us like a cold, suffocating shroud, a brutal reminder that the danger was not behind us, but very much present. Yet despite the panic that threatened to swallow her whole, Emily chose not to retreat. Instead, she stood her ground. We reported the threat to the authorities, working tirelessly to ensure her safety, taking every possible precaution. That moment revealed a transformation that stunned me. The little girl who had once trembled in silence was now a woman fighting back, defiant and strong. As we navigated this treacherous path, something beautiful happened between us. The anger and resentment that had once built walls between Emily and me began to dissolve. Where bitterness had tried to take root, understanding and mutual respect grew in its place. Our relationship evolved beyond mother and daughter. It became a partnership forged in the crucible of hardship and healing. We found moments of joy not just in the grand milestones, but in the small everyday rituals that stitch lives together. Cooking meals side by side, sharing stories long into the night, laughing over old memories that reminded us of happier times. One evening, as the sun set and bathed the room in warm golden hues, Emily looked at me with tears shimmering in her eyes. Her voice was soft but steady as she whispered, "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I wanted to give up on myself." Those words struck me deeply, an indelible testament to the power of love and the human spirit's capacity to heal and rise. They will stay with me forever. But I also knew the journey ahead was far from over. Recovery is never a straight line. It is a winding path full of unexpected twists, setbacks, and moments that test the very core of one's resolve. Emily still wrestled with nightmares that dragged her back into the past, with trust issues that made every relationship fragile, and with the scars of betrayal that refused to fade completely. Yet with every day that passed, she grew stronger, more confident, more determined to build the life she deserved. Our fight was both public and profoundly personal. It wasn't just about securing justice in a courtroom, it was about reclaiming dignity, peace, and hope. It was about breaking the chains that abuse had wrapped around her and forging a future where fear no longer dictated her every move. And through it all, we stood together, mother and daughter, survivors and warriors, bound by a bond forged in fire. Some relationships are tested and shattered by hardship, but others are tempered and strengthened, becoming unbreakable. Ours was one of the latter. No matter what storms lay ahead, I knew we would face them side by side, ready to fight, not just for survival, but for a new beginning. Because some bonds forged in the fires of hardship and sorrow carry a strength that can never be broken. Facing the truth was one of the most painful yet liberating moments of my life. For years, Emily had carried the weight of silence, a heavy burden she bore alone, pretending that everything was fine when inside she was quietly crumbling. The walls she had carefully built to protect herself from the harsh reality finally came crashing down, and, in their place, something raw and unfiltered emerged, the undeniable truth. It was a quiet evening, one of those still moments when the world seems to pause, that Emily finally opened up completely. We sat across from each other in the dim glow of the living room, shadows dancing softly on the walls as the fading light seeped through the curtains. Her hands trembled in her lap, but her voice, though soft, held a steady strength that surprised me. It was a testament to the fierce resilience she had quietly nurtured inside the courage that had been buried beneath years of fear and pain. "I was trapped, Mom," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Tears slid slowly down her cheeks, glistening in the low light. Not just by him, by Jake, but by my own hope. I believed things would get better. I believed he could change. But the truth was far uglier than I ever imagined. Her confession shattered the last of my illusions. I had seen the surface, the visible scars, the bruises that time couldn't fully hide, the fearful glances, but hearing her speak of the psychological chains that bound her was devastating. It was like witnessing a life lived in shadows, a prison built not of bars, but of silence and self-doubt. She described it all, the constant crushing fear that clung to her every waking moment, the way Jake's moods could shift without warning, forcing her to walk on eggshells as if one wrong step would bring disaster. She spoke of the manipulation that slowly eroded her confidence, convincing her that she was worthless, that no one else could love her, that leaving was impossible. And the isolation. That was the cruelest part, how Jake systematically cut her off from friends and family, threading lies and jealousy to sever every lifeline. Emily told me about nights spent crying alone in the dark, how the silence outside was deafening when your heart is breaking inside, how her dreams were haunted by violent shadows that stole her peace. "I blamed myself for so long," she said, her voice cracking with the weight of years. "I thought if I was better, stronger, kinder, quieter, he wouldn't hurt me. But that was a lie, Mom. A lie I told myself to survive." Hearing this broke my heart again in 1,000 small pieces. Abuse is not always marked by visible wounds. It's the slow, corrosive poison that seeps into a person's spirit, whispering that they are broken beyond repair. It is the unrelenting erosion of self-worth, the drowning of hope, in a sea of shame and fear. But Emily's decision to share her truth was a beacon of light cutting through the darkness. It was the first true step toward healing, not just for her, but for the fragile, fractured relationship between us. The moment she opened the door, I knew there was no turning back. We had to face the truth together. From that evening on, there was no more hiding, no more pretending. We sat with the pain, named the fear, acknowledged the betrayal. And in doing so, we began to dismantle the power that pain held over her. The silence was replaced by words, and the words became a lifeline. The road ahead was anything but easy. Emily grappled with nightmares that threw her back into the darkest moments of her past. Her body would tense involuntarily, her breath hitching, as memories she wished to forget surged unbidden. Flashbacks blurred the lines between past and present, turning simple days into battles of endurance. Therapy became a crucial part of her recovery. The sessions were draining emotionally, exhausting, and sometimes terrifying, but they also offered her tools to reclaim control. Step by step, she learned how to rebuild her self-worth, how to forgive herself for the impossible things she had been forced to endure, and how to trust that she was worthy of love and safety. Through it all, I stood by her side, learning to support without overwhelming, to listen without rushing to fix. Sometimes the greatest gift you can offer is simply presence, being there when words fail, holding space for pain, and letting love be the silent anchor in a turbulent sea. Our fight wasn't only personal, it also had to be legal. We worked closely with attorneys who understood the delicate and complex nature of domestic abuse cases. The courtroom became a battlefield, each hearing a test of Emily's strength and determination. She had to face Jake again in public, recounting her story under the harsh light of scrutiny, defending her right to safety and dignity. Jake's attempts to intimidate us grew more brazen. Threatening messages arrived late at night. He showed up unannounced at places Emily tried to find peace, and his family carried on their campaign of lies, painting her as the villain to anyone who would listen. But no matter how loud the noise, Emily's truth rang clearer. Witnesses stepped forward, their testimonies shining light on the dark corners Jake had tried to hide behind. Evidence was meticulously gathered and presented, each piece a nail sealing the coffin of his deception. Slowly, the walls of denial and manipulation began to crumble. Throughout this relentless ordeal, Emily's strength became a source of inspiration to me every single day. Watching her endure, fight back, and rise despite everything was a reminder of the incredible resilience the human spirit can summon, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. Our relationship, once strained and fractured by fear and resentment, blossomed into something new, an unshakable partnership built on trust, understanding, and mutual support. We celebrated small victories, those precious moments of peace and hope that signaled a future slowly being reclaimed. Facing the truth was excruciatingly painful, yes, but it was also the key that unlocked freedom. Freedom from silence, from shame, and from the chains of fear. And together, Emily and I stepped through that door into a life where healing was possible, where hope could grow, and where the future was hers to shape. The path was long, the scars still visible, but every day brought new strength, new resolve. And no matter what storms awaited us, I knew we would face them side by side. Because some truths, however painful, have the power to set us free, and some bonds forged in the fire of hardship can never be broken. The fight for freedom was unlike anything I had ever imagined, grueling, relentless, and deeply personal. It stretched far beyond the confines of courtrooms and legal jargon. This battle was waged on multiple fronts: emotional, psychological, and spiritual. For Emily and me, it was a war to reclaim everything that had been stolen from her: her peace, her dignity, her very life. Each day brought new challenges, new fears, but also new sparks of hope that fueled our determination. Walking into the courtroom for the first time was like stepping into a storm. The air was thick with tension, the atmosphere charged with anticipation and dread. Jake and his family sat across from us, adversaries not just intent on winning a case, but bent on keeping Emily imprisoned in the nightmare he had created. Their arguments were sharp, rehearsed, and merciless. They weaponized every word, every gesture to discredit her. They painted her as unstable, exaggerating moments of vulnerability into evidence of madness. They twisted the narrative, trying to turn the truth upside down so that Emily, the survivor, became the accused. But Emily was no longer the frightened girl who had cowered in silence. The transformation I witnessed was profound. With every hearing, she grew stronger, standing tall with a steady voice and unwavering truth. I saw the fire in her eyes, the courage to face not only the man who had harmed her, but the system that often seemed designed to protect people like him. Each time she recounted the pain, the abuse, and the betrayal, she chipped away at the walls of denial and deception that had shielded Jake for so long. She reclaimed her narrative piece by piece, refusing to let anyone silence her story. The legal process was exhausting beyond words. It felt like an endless marathon of long hours, piles of paperwork, and meetings that drained every ounce of energy. The waiting was agonizing, the agonizing pauses between court dates where fear and uncertainty gnawed at our resolve. Every small misstep threatened to undo progress. Every technicality risked setting us back weeks, sometimes months. But with each hearing, with every testimony delivered, and every piece of evidence laid bare, we edged closer to justice, justice that felt both necessary and fragile. Yet the courtroom was only one battlefield. Outside, the emotional toll weighed just as heavily. Emily was caught in waves of doubt and fear that threatened to pull her under at times. Memories of abuse lurked in the shadows of her mind, sometimes surfacing unbidden in nightmares or sudden panic attacks. The future felt like an uncertain path shrouded in mist. Would she ever truly be safe? Could she trust anyone again? The scars left by Jake's abuse ran deep beneath her skin, invisible, yet unbearably real. Healing, I learned, was not a linear journey but a winding road scattered with setbacks, moments of despair, and precious small triumphs. I had to learn a new kind of patience, one that demanded presence, understanding, and restraint. I became her anchor during storms of despair, the steady voice that said, "You are not alone." I learned to celebrate every step forward with her, even the smallest victories, moments when she smiled, when she slept peacefully, when she spoke of dreams again. Because healing is a marathon, not a sprint, and sometimes the most powerful progress is invisible to the outside world. Our relationship evolved in ways I hadn't expected. The resentment that once threatened to tear us apart softened into something else, understanding, compassion, and a profound love. There were moments when we laughed together, sharing stories from better days, reminding ourselves that joy could still exist amidst the chaos. And there were moments when tears were shed in silence, bonds deepening through shared pain. These quiet connections became our sanctuary, small beacons of light that reminded me why every hardship was worth enduring. We were not alone in this fight. Friends and supporters rallied around us, their kindness a powerful balm to Emily's battered spirit. Their solidarity created a community that reminded her she was not isolated, not invisible. Through their stories of survival and hope, Emily found inspiration to keep moving forward. Their presence was a reminder that healing was possible, that freedom was worth fighting for. But the battle was far from over. Jake's threats continued lurking like shadows at the edge of every day. Subtle warnings slipped into texts, attempts at intimidation in the form of unexpected appearances and veiled threats. The fear of retaliation loomed constantly. We took every precaution possible, working closely with law enforcement and safety experts to protect Emily. Every step she took was measured, every decision weighed against the potential danger. Safety became a constant priority, a fragile fortress we guarded fiercely. One night, after a particularly grueling day in court, where the weight of the fight felt almost unbearable, Emily turned to me with a vulnerability that cut through the exhaustion. "I don't know how I would have made it without you," she said, her voice soft but full of meaning. Those words were a balm to my soul, a reminder of the power of unwavering love, the quiet strength found in simply being there. Together we faced the darkness hand in hand, heart to heart. Emily's resilience became a beacon of hope, not only for herself, but for others trapped in similar battles. Her courage was a living testament that even in the deepest shadows, light could be found. That no matter how broken a spirit may seem, it can be mended, rebuilt, and set free. The fight for freedom was hard, and it tested every fiber of our beings, but it was necessary and essential struggle to reclaim a life stolen by fear and control. And through every challenge, every tear, and every victory, we held onto one unshakable belief that justice, healing, and peace were not just distant dreams but attainable realities. Our journey was far from over. The road ahead was long, winding, and uncertain. But with each step, each moment of courage, each small victory, we reclaimed a piece of Emily's life, one moment at a time, one victory at a time. And that was enough to keep us going. Healing is never a straight path. It twists and turns unpredictably, much like a wild river that flows with sudden currents, sometimes rushing forward with hope and momentum, and other times slowing to a crawl, blocked by unseen obstacles or pulling under by deep pools of pain. For Emily, the process of rebuilding her life after years of abuse was exactly that, a slow, often painful journey punctuated by moments that tested every ounce of her courage. And through it all, it tested mine as well. Those first days of freedom felt almost surreal, like stepping out into sunlight after a long, suffocating night. There were no more bruises hidden beneath layers of clothing, no more careful, silent steps on eggshells that threatened to crack at any moment. Yet beneath the surface, beneath the visible relief, the emotional wounds ran deep scars invisible to the eye, but no less raw and aching. Emily struggled with trust, not only in others, but in herself. Years of manipulation had planted seeds of doubt that took root in her mind, twisting her thoughts, making her question every decision she made, every feeling she had. The insidious voice of fear was still there, lurking in the shadows of her consciousness. "I'm scared, Mom," she confessed one evening as the day faded into night, her voice barely above a whisper, fragile and trembling. "What if I'm never really free? What if he's still controlling me even when he's not here?" Her fear was completely understandable. Abuse isn't something you can simply walk away from and expect to be healed instantly. It seeps into your very being. It invades your thoughts, invades your dreams, and reshapes your understanding of yourself. But I was there every day reminding her that freedom wasn't a single moment or a clear destination. It was a journey, sometimes slow, sometimes uncertain, but always forward. We began therapy together, seeking out a safe space where Emily could confront the ghosts of her past and learn to trust her own voice once more. Those sessions were hard. They were filled with tears that carried years of pain, with memories that cut like knives, and with breakthroughs that sometimes came in whispers rather than declarations. Slowly, painstakingly, Emily learned to separate herself from the cruelty Jake had inflicted upon her. She began to see her worth not as something defined by abuse, but as something innate and unshakable. There were days when it all felt impossible, when the weight of trauma threatened to drag her back into despair, threatening to undo the fragile progress she had made. But there were also days filled with unexpected light days when she smiled freely, laughed without reservation, and dared to dream again. Those were the moments that kept us both going, reminders that healing, though difficult, was possible. Our relationship, too, blossomed anew. The walls that fear and resentment had built between us slowly crumbled, softened by steady streams of love, patience, and understanding. We rediscovered joy in simple, quiet moments, a walk through the park under a canopy of autumn leaves, cooking dinner together and sharing stories about nothing and everything, late-night talks that stretched until the early hours where laughter and tears mingled in equal measure. These everyday moments became the foundation on which our healing rested. Emily began reclaiming pieces of herself that had been lost in the darkness of those years. She reached out to old friends she had cut herself off from during her ordeal. She revisited passions and dreams she had shelved long ago, tentative but determined to rediscover who she was beyond the abuse. Bit by bit, she constructed a new life, one that reflected the strength and resilience she had always carried within her, even if she had forgotten it for a time. Yet the scars remained. Trust was fragile, easily shattered by a wrong word or a painful memory suddenly stirred. Some days the past crept back in casting long shadows over her progress, but each day also brought growth. Emily became stronger, more confident, more certain of her worth and her future. Together we navigated the practical challenges that come with rebuilding a life from the ground up. Finding a safe, stable home was a top priority. Financial independence was another hurdle, a mountain of bills, job searches, and long nights trying to make sense of new responsibilities. Every step forward felt overwhelming, but with every accomplishment, Emily's sense of control returned piece by piece. The legal battles which had loomed over us like a storm cloud finally reached a turning point. Armed with solid evidence, witness testimonies, and the unshakable truth of Emily's story, the court granted her the protection she desperately needed. Jake was ordered to stay away. Custody arrangements were settled, carefully designed to keep Emily and those she cared about safe and stable. But beyond the courtroom victories, the greatest triumph was something deeper and more profound. Emily was reclaiming her life, not as a victim bound by past horrors, but as a survivor ready to face whatever came next with grace and strength. She was becoming the person she was always meant to be, whole, proud, and unbroken. One quiet afternoon, as sunlight poured through the windows and warmed the living room, where we sat side by side, Emily looked at me with something I hadn't seen in a long time: quiet confidence and peace. "I'm not the same person I was, Mom," she said softly, her voice steady and sure. "But I'm proud of who I'm becoming." Her words filled me with a profound sense of hope and gratitude. We had walked through fire-endured pain and betrayal, and though the journey was far from over, the promise of healing shone brightly ahead. Those words were a testament to everything we had survived and everything that still awaited us. Our story is one of heartbreak and resilience of loss, and rediscovery of pain and profound love. It is the story of a mother and daughter bound not only by blood, but by the unbreakable strength forged in hardship. Because sometimes the greatest healing doesn't come from forgetting the past, it comes from facing it head-on together. And together we continue walking that winding path step by step, day by day, toward a future where hope lives, where peace is possible, and where freedom is finally real. Just as I began to believe that Emily was truly moving forward, a new and unexpected challenge emerged, one that cut deeper than any wound Jake had ever inflicted. The person I had fought so hard to save, the daughter I had stood by through every storm, began to turn against me in ways I never anticipated. It started subtly. A coldness in her voice during our conversations, a hesitation when I tried to offer advice or support. I told myself it was the natural frustration of someone rebuilding their life, the normal push and pull between independence and dependence. But the distance grew, and with it a sharp edge to her words. "You don't understand what it's like to live through this," she said one afternoon, frustration boiling beneath her calm exterior. "Sometimes I feel like you don't really see me, only the broken parts." Her resentment stung like fire. I had been there for her every step of the way, sacrificed so much, and yet she saw only the pain, the struggle, and blamed me for her hardships. I tried to bridge the gap, to remind her that healing isn't a straight line, that anger and blame are part of the process. But sometimes love isn't enough to reach someone lost in their own pain. Emily's accusations deepened. She said I pushed too hard, that my protectiveness felt like control, that my constant presence was a reminder of everything she wanted to forget. "You don't let me be," she said bitterly. "You don't let me make my own mistakes." Her words tore at me, exposing raw insecurities I had buried beneath years of motherhood. I realized then that healing not only required patience, but humility, the ability to step back, to listen, and sometimes to let go. Our relationship became a fragile dance of push and pull. There were days filled with laughter and understanding, moments when the love between us shone brightly. But there were also days when resentment cast long shadows, when words were sharp and wounds reopened. Despite the pain, I refused to give up. I reminded myself that trauma changes people, that healing is messy and imperfect, and that the bond between mother and daughter, though tested, is resilient. In the midst of this turmoil, Emily made a surprising decision to become an advocate for other survivors. Inspired by her journey, she began volunteering at a local shelter, sharing her story and offering hope to those still trapped in darkness. Watching her transform pain into purpose was a revelation. It gave me hope that the scars she bore would one day become symbols of strength, not just of suffering. But even as she reached out to others, the rift between us lingered. Trust was slow to rebuild, and sometimes the past's ghosts seemed to whisper lies that drove us apart. One night, after a particularly difficult argument, Emily looked at me with tear-filled eyes and said, "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but I want to try." Those words were a fragile bridge, one that I vowed to cross with patience, love, and unwavering commitment. Our journey was far from over. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and healing yet to come. But I knew one thing for certain: no matter the storms, No matter the pain, a mother's love is a force that can weather any trial. And for Emily, I would always be there, steadfast, understanding, and ready to walk beside her toward the light. Acceptance didn't come easily. It wasn't a sudden moment of clarity or a peaceful epiphany that washed over me and made everything right. Instead, it was a slow, often painful process, a reluctant surrender to the hard truth that some wounds take longer to heal than I ever imagined. Emily's anger, her resentment, even her blame. They weren't personal attacks aimed at me, but expressions of trauma and grief. I had no right to rush her or demand that she move past it faster than her own heart allowed. In the quiet, still hours of the night when the world seemed to hush and only the steady rhythm of my own breath filled the room, I found myself reflecting on everything we had been through. The battles fought in silence, and in courtrooms the pain that had shaped and scarred us both, and the fragile hope that somehow, despite everything, still flickered faintly in the darkness. It was in those moments I realized acceptance wasn't about forgetting or excusing the past. It was about embracing the journey in all its rawness, its imperfections, setbacks, and painful truths. I learned to accept Emily's anger as a necessary part of her healing. It was her way of reclaiming control over a story that had once been stolen from her, a story rewritten by fear and abuse. Sometimes that anger was directed toward me, and I understood that it wasn't about me personally, but about the pain she was carrying. I accepted that there would be days when she needed distance, when she had to step away to find herself apart from me, to stand on her own feet and process her feelings without the pressure of expectation. Most importantly, I accepted that love is not always neat or easy. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes even painful. It doesn't follow a straight path, and it certainly doesn't come with guarantees. But it's persistent and enduring, capable of weathering storms if given time and space to grow. Despite the distance that sometimes grew between us, my resolve to protect and support Emily never wavered. I vowed to be the steady presence she could rely on, her anchor in the storm, even when she pushed me away, or when silence stretched between us like an unbridgeable chasm. I promised myself I would practice patience, compassion, and understanding, remembering that her journey was uniquely hers. I was simply honored to walk alongside her. Our relationship didn't transform overnight. There were no grand gestures or sweeping reconciliations. Instead, the shift happened quietly, almost imperceptibly, in small moments that became the foundation of our renewed bond. A shared smile across a crowded room, a comforting hug after a difficult day, a quiet conversation that stretched into the early morning hours. Those moments were precious reminders that beneath the scars and brokenness, the love between mother and daughter endured, soft, steady, and unyielding. Emily's strength blossomed in ways I hadn't dared to hope for. She began to pursue her dreams with a renewed passion fueled not despite her past, but because of it. She channeled her experiences into advocacy and support for others trapped in similar situations, women and men silenced by fear, caught in cycles of abuse. Her voice, once muted by terror and shame, now echoed with conviction and hope. It was a voice that demanded to be heard, a voice that carried the power to inspire and uplift. Watching Emily transform was both inspiring and humbling. I saw the woman she was becoming, not just a survivor, but a fighter and a beacon of light for those still lost in darkness. Her courage and resilience breathed new life into my own hope. She had reclaimed her story, reshaped her future, and in doing so gave me faith that healing was not only possible, but real. Yet even as she flourished, the shadows of the past lingered. Trust had to be rebuilt slowly, brick by brick, carefully and with intention. Sometimes it was shaken by doubt or fear, a wrong word, a painful memory, or a day when old anxieties reared their head. But each challenge was met with honesty and forgiveness, a willingness to confront the difficulties without turning away. We learned together that healing is not a destination, but a lifelong journey, an ongoing process of growth, understanding, and renewal. We navigated the complexities of this journey side by side, sometimes stepping forward confidently, other times holding hands through moments of uncertainty. And through it all, my love for Emily remained unwavering. It was a quiet kind of love, not loud or demanding, but steady and powerful, a foundation she could rely on as she built her new life. Because sometimes the greatest act of love isn't to rush or fix or force change. It's simply to stand firm, to be patient, and to wait for those we cherish to find their way home at their own pace. To be a safe harbor in a world that often feels chaotic and unforgiving. And that is exactly what I chose to be for Emily. The journey we walked together from the darkest shadows of abuse to the fragile dawn of healing was unlike anything I ever imagined. As I reflect on it now, I realize that some battles aren't about winning or losing. They're about standing strong, unwavering, even when everything around you feels like it's crumbling. Emily is no longer the frightened girl who once hid bruises beneath long sleeves. She is a woman reborn from pain, a survivor who reclaimed her life with fierce determination and quiet grace. Watching her stand tall, I feel a pride that words can't capture. Our relationship, once fractured by fear and resentment, has become a testament to the power of love and forgiveness. We've learned that healing doesn't erase the past, but it can transform it into strength. I won't pretend the scars are gone, they never will be. But they don't define us. What defines us is how we rise, how we fight, and how we love through the hardest storms. If there's one truth I've learned through this journey, it's that a mother's love is relentless. It's a light that guides through the darkest nights, a shelter in the fiercest storms. To anyone watching who feels trapped, broken, or alone, know that you are not. There is hope, there is help, and there is healing. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for it. Thank you for listening to our story. If it touched you, if it gave you hope or strength, please share your own story in the comments. Let's build a community where no one has to suffer in silence. And don't forget to subscribe to Grace's Truth for more stories of resilience, love, and ultimate redemption. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply surviving and thriving against all odds.